Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mumey, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to Celebration Bar Review and the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is episode 112, and my name is Jackson Mumey. I'm glad to have you with me. There's a lot that's been going on, and we've got a big episode for you today. A lot of information. I wanted to start before we get to the meat of today's presentation, which is a Facebook Live video that I just did called 5 Things to Do If You Failed the Bar Exam. Not the most uplifting topic, to be sure, but really useful information and necessary information, certainly if you're in that group of people who did fail your bar exam. And if you're in that situation or think you might be, then I definitely encourage you to stick around and listen to that discussion. But before we get to that discussion, I wanted to just share with you the latest breaking news, and this week it's out of Florida, where the Florida Bar Exam released their July 2016 results. And as we're producing this episode and as it's releasing, these results are just getting out, and so this is the first preliminary take on the numbers. And if I had to summarize them for you, the numbers are generally not good overall in the state. There were about 3,500 applicants that took the July exam, and of those, 1,600 candidates were accepted for admission. That means a pass rate of 47.3% overall. Now, I want to emphasize that number because a lot of what you'll hear in the media is only the first-time takers rate. 47.8% overall really reflects the large number of repeat bar takers and their results. We have far more repeat bar takers in the February administration than in July. You might recall that in February 2016, that overall number was below 35%. So this is a better number, but we would expect that given the higher number of first-time bar takers. For first-time bar takers, the overall state pass rate was 68.2%, and that's the worst number for first-time bar takers in at least 5 years. I'd have to go back in my records. It could be longer than that, but at least for the last 5 years, that is the worst number. For those people who came from non-Florida law schools, the pass rate for first-time takers was 65%, so not great. And for those who are admitted to the practice of law, that means you're licensed somewhere else and you're taking the Florida bar exam, that pass rate was almost 69%. So a little better than the overall first-time rate, certainly better than the out-of-state Florida law schools. Now you might say, well, those Florida law schools, they must have been killing it. Well, some of them did. Some of them got killed. St. Thomas had a pass rate of 45%. Barry had 49%. Those are on the low end, obviously. On the upper end, we've got University of Florida at 78%, University of Miami at 80%. Stetson had a good performance at, 80%. And FIU, I mean, they killed it, 87%. Now, one thing to keep in mind about these numbers is that they are manipulated to some extent. There are more than one Florida law school that holds back students from taking the bar exam as soon as they get out of school. In some cases, they're actually paying their students to not sit for the bar so that when they go to take the bar, they're no longer first-time takers, even though it's really their first time sitting for the bar. They're doing that to jack this number of first-time takers up. And so you're really seeing the cream of the crop of some of these law schools taking the bar exam and being reported as first-time takers. So I think the more honest number, the number I would be looking at, is the overall bar taker rate of 47.3%. For Celebration Bar Review students, it looks like we're going to exceed that number. We've had some terrific stories, some unbelievable stories of successes in the last day or so as results came out. And we're going to be sharing those with you over the next few weeks in our series of Hangouts with Successful Bar Exam Takers. So check out the podcast. If you haven't been with us, you can check some past episodes, and we've got a whole bunch of these Hangouts coming out. You can also find them on our Facebook page, and we'll make them available on YouTube as well. I also want to invite you, if you're taking the bar exam in 2017, to join me this Thursday for a free masterclass. It's called How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. And whether you're a first-time taker or a repeat bar taker, these are the 4 steps that you need to follow in order to pass the bar. We've shared this information with literally thousands of people, including a number of people who got passing results yesterday on the Florida bar exam and in some of the small UBE states, which have begun to release their results as well. And it's great to see people go through that master class, find out these techniques, employ them through our bar review course, and then reach a passing result. And so I would invite you to join us as well. All you have to do is go to celebrationbarreview.com. You'll see a couple of buttons up there where you can sign up. The one on the top is to join me live Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's 12 noon Pacific time. And the button on the bottom gives you the opportunity to schedule a video replay at any time that's convenient for you. Same material, same offers, same information, so whatever's most convenient for your schedule. But go to celebrationbarreview.com, go ahead and register for that free webinar, How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. Well, as we transition and start to look at this season of results coming in, Florida's the first big jurisdiction that provides results. We've got a lot more coming over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And so I thought it was appropriate to share some information with the Facebook students just a couple of days ago about 5 things that you should be doing if you failed the bar. And the reason I have this conversation before results come out is that it's a whole lot easier to be thinking rationally about this process than right at that moment when you get your results. So I hope you'll stick around and listen for that information. I think you're going to find it useful. And as always, we encourage you to join us on this podcast series. All you have to do is go to iTunes or iHeartRadio. Now we're there as well. Or you can go to celebrationbarreview.com, click on the link that says podcast at the top, and you'll see the show notes and all of the prior episodes as well. So we invite you to join us in whatever way works best. So let's jump into today's message about 5 things to do if you failed your bar exam. So welcome. And today what we're going to be talking about is 5 things that you should be doing if you find yourself in the position where you failed the bar exam. As results start to come out over the next few weeks, we know that there are going to be a significant number of people around the country who will fail their bar exams. And we want to make sure that you have some idea of what to do. And if you've gotten your results as you're listening or watching this, there's certainly some steps that you can take. And so I want to outline for you 5 particular things that I think will make a difference for you if you failed the bar exam. And we're going to go through each of those. And if you've got questions or comments, be sure to let me know. The first thing that I think is important to say about failing the bar exam is that when we talk about failing the exam, there is a distinction to be made between failing the test and being a failure. And I recognize that many people equate the two, that they'll say to themselves, well, I failed the test, therefore I am a personal failure. And that's not so. And I think in any other context we would recognize that. But because the bar exam is such a high stakes test, it's easy to confuse those two things. And so you start feeling like you're a failure. If you really begin to feel that way, it's important that you talk to somebody else about it and that you get that out of your system, because it's certainly debilitating when it comes to your ability to be successful in the future, but it can also impact the quality of your life, the quality of your relationships, the quality of your work. And so I want to just overview with that if you failed the bar, what it means is that for a day or 2 days or 3 days when you sat for a test, you didn't perform in a way that some third party arbitrarily decided was insufficient or not enough. It doesn't mean anything about your success or ability. And in point of fact, if you were good enough to get to the bar exam, you're good enough to pass the bar exam, and you're really a success by most measures of the world. It's just for those particular days you weren't successful. Well, as I said, there are 5 things that I think you should be doing, and I want to now talk about each of those items as we go forward. The first thing that I want to be able to talk about here is this notion of what do you do if you failed? Well, first, you have to grieve it. And what I mean by grieving it is that you need to have the reality of being able to just emotionally let go. You have to be able to say, this is really awful and it feels bad, and you've got to give yourself the opportunity to begin to really grieve it and get through that process. For some people that means really long cries. For some other people it'll mean screaming and yelling. For other people it's just taking a long walk and getting away from everyone else. Ultimately, the goal here is that you understand and begin to recognize that you've just got to let it out. If you hold it inside, you're going to have a real problem. and it's going to build up and it's going to explode. And the problem is, much like this sneeze that I'm about to have, what a day I'm having here. I'm going to sneeze just like the grieving process. Excuse me. Okay. But if you don't let go of it, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen at an inopportune time and in an inopportune way. And so the first thing I think you have to do is literally give yourself the opportunity, just as you would in any traumatic situation, to go through any loss situation. You've got to be able to grieve what's happened. And we all grieve differently, and there's no one right way to grieve this. And some people would say, oh, you're overreacting. Why are you so upset? It's just a test. And yet other people, I think, clearly would recognize what an important test it is and how much is at stake. And so there is no one single way that we go through that grief process, but you must go through it. I am worried when I encounter people who say, I'm stoic and I'm not going to respond to this. And at the moment, they're probably correct, but ultimately, at some stage, it will come back and there will be an impact. And one of the things that we want to avoid would be the equivalent of a post-traumatic stress disorder, because those tend to appear when stress comes back up later. And as you're studying and retaking and sitting for the exam, that's the moment when that unresolved grief can jump up and grab you and cause enormous stress and anxiety. And so the very first thing you have to do is give yourself a little bit of time. If you get your bar results on a Friday, give yourself the weekend to grieve it. If you get your results on a Monday, give yourself 2 or 3 or 4 days to get through that process before you start making significant decisions about what you're going to do next. So that's item number 1. I don't think my slides are working very well, so I'm going to skip them. June tells me that they're not working well, so let's just go on. Item number 2 that you have to do, first things that you have to do, is you have to forgive yourself. You have to forgive yourself. And what I mean by forgiving yourself is really very simple. When you failed the bar, as I said at the beginning, it feels like a personal failure. It feels like you are a failure. But beyond that, many bar takers, in my experience, start to blame themselves. They start to feel as though they are insufficient in some way. I didn't study hard enough, or I didn't study properly, or I used the wrong bar review, or I studied the wrong materials, or I didn't focus enough on this part of the exam, or whatever it might be. And as a result, we tend to carry those things like burdens with us all the time. And the reality of that is that many people end up in this circumstance in which they literally can't figure out what to do, next, and they're stuck. They're just stuck. So this second step is that you have to forgive yourself. You have to let go of whatever happened, whether it was right or wrong, whether you think that it worked or didn't work. You need to let go of it. You need to forgive the errors that you might have made. Maybe they were errors, but maybe not. And it's okay either way. The danger of not forgiving yourself is that there's a tendency then to become defensive about what you did, to say, in effect, well, I'm not going to forgive myself, so I'm going to claim that everything I did was right and perfect and it was everybody else's fault. You're going to play the blame game. It's very dangerous to do that. And so I want to encourage you that if you get a failing result, be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself. As you go through step number 1, the grieving process, you also have to recognize that the tendency will be to blame yourself, along with a lot of other people or entities. You'll blame your bar review, you'll blame the bar examiners, you'll blame your law school, you'll blame the ABA, you'll blame whoever. But the reality is that you'll blame yourself at some deep level. And so if you don't forgive yourself, it is impossible to move forward. And when I see people who are really stuck in a rut where they keep doing the same things over and over again, one of the reasons for that is that they haven't forgiven themselves. They're literally wallowing in that same sense of despair and self-loathing and unhappiness with what they did. Did you do everything right? Well, obviously not, but it doesn't mean you did everything wrong either. And so I think it's really important that you give yourself a little bit of a chance to get through that process, get over it. I love the idea of going to confession, confess your sins, if you will, and then get over it. Forgive yourself, accept the forgiveness, and move on. So that's item number 2. We said number 1 was grieve it. Number 2 is to forgive yourself. Number 3 For those of you that are a bit more rational and stoic, I suppose, item number 3 that we want to look at is to do what we call a non-emotional evaluation. Do a non-emotional evaluation of what happened. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, the non-emotional evaluation simply is an opportunity or an exercise in which you sit down with a piece of paper and a pen or your digital device, whatever it might be, and you make a list of the things that went well for you and the things that did not go well. If you've been on my webinar, you know that I talk about the success-based approach to learning and the failure or problem-based approach to learning. I want you to use the success-based approach. You see, no matter what score you received, if we ask the question, why so high, which you would say, well, wait a minute, it was a failing score, so we should be asking why so low. No, we really should ask why so high. We should find out what you did well. What is it about that performance that gave it that score and not a lower score? And once we've decided that, we can start to evaluate where your strengths are and where you need to continue working. But if you ignore your strengths, if you go away from the things that worked for you, you're really putting yourself in, I think, too deep of a hole. And one of the ways to figure that out is to do this non-emotional evaluation. Well, what was good about my studies? Well, I gave it this many hours. I studied consistently. What was bad about the study? Well, I borrowed somebody else's old bar review books. I didn't really get studying until about 4 weeks before the exam. I was distracted. I was afraid. I tried to memorize and recite. Whatever those things are, write them down. Make a list. Look at it. And then don't judge it. Just look at it. Just accept that there are some things that were good and some things that were not so good. And if you can get that non-emotional evaluation in your mind, you're going to find that it's a whole lot easier to begin to assess what was positive for you and what needs to be corrected. But you see, so often what I find is that people do one side of the evaluation. They only look at what went wrong, regardless. And I get plenty of people that come to me that have taken one of the big box bar reviews and failed, and they say, well, here's everything that was wrong. And, there's a part of me, I'm not going to lie, there's a part of me that feels pretty smug about that and goes, yeah, I could have told you that. But I also know that there were some things that went right. And the difficulty is that if that student is not considering what went right, they're really putting themselves in a trap, in a hole, and I hate to see that happen to people. And so I really want to encourage you to avoid that trap whenever possible and to just make that list. Now, once you've made your list, and it might be something that takes you a day or 2 or 3, maybe it's a list you keep with you for a few days a week, pull it out when you're feeling less emotional about the results, when you can talk about them and not be choked up, and look at the list. What was good? What wasn't good? And then resolve to work on the things that are strengths to make them better strengths, and then not to focus exclusively on the weaknesses. Sure, you want to improve them, no doubt about that, but you don't want to focus exclusively on them, and that's why I want you to do this non-emotional list. It's much too easy in the aftermath of the bar exam to feel like everything was wrong, everything was bad, therefore I'm no good and I can't do it, and that's the worst thing to be doing. So that's our third step, non-emotional evaluation. What's the fourth thing that you should be doing if you get into this situation where you find yourself having failed the bar? Well, it's very simply, and I know that it's going to be a tough one for some of you, but here it is. Get started now. Yeah, you need to get started now. Some of you are going to say, well, I need time to recover, and I understand that, for sure. As I've talked about in grieving and forgiving yourself and doing this non-emotional evaluation, you do need a few days. But that's a few days, not a few weeks, not a few months. Now, in the beginning of the results cycle, it's easy to have the false sense of luxury that you can take some time before you get started. That's a mistake. You should begin right away. It's an advantage to you if you're in a jurisdiction like Florida that gets its results out early. If you're in a jurisdiction like California that gets results out very late, you don't get that luxury at all. But either way, you need to get started now. Now, some people will be saying when I say that, well, I really feel like I need to sit out an exam. And I understand the reasoning behind the I'm going to wait an exam and come back. And sometimes it's a legitimate reason. I'm an accountant and I can't take time away during a particular season of taxes to take the bar, or I've got family requirements, or there's a wedding going on, or something else that's happening. That certainly makes sense. But barring those kinds of unusual externalities, you should sit for the next bar exam. Absolutely, sit for the next bar exam. You've got the momentum of your studies. You've got the momentum of what you've been doing. The material's, relatively speaking, fresh in your mind, no matter where you studied or who you studied with. It's to your advantage to take the next bar exam. It's rarely to your advantage to sit out and wait. Plus, what you're doing is you're really putting the entire bar study process out a full year from where you are right now, and that's a really difficult process and period of time to wait to take the exam a year from now and then wait for the results from that. And so here we are a year from today just finding out if you can move on with that part of your life. I honestly believe if you start now, even if you're in one of the late jurisdictions, you have enough time to prepare for the exam, at least in our course. It's absolutely manageable, and you can still stay at about 20 hours per week and study. So for those of you who've been told that you have to study 300, 400, 500, 600 hours to prepare for the exam, that's empirically not true, and it's not necessary, and you don't need to buy into that reasoning or methodology. There is no real reason behind it, because what most of those people are doing is asking you to memorize. And as we've talked about elsewhere, memorization is the least effective way to study, but it's also the most time-consuming. So you want to start now so you have the advantage of spaced repetition, of learning in small pieces and over small steps, and by doing that, you're going to get a much better result. Is it hard to get back into the arena and start studying again? Well, for some people it really is, and I recognize that. But the truth is, the longer you wait, the harder it is to go back. There's a reason that some of these great aphorisms still exist. Get back up on the horse right away. Well, yeah, because fear builds, and the longer you wait, the more the fear grows. I can tell you that virtually every week I talk to someone who took a bar exam and then waited thinking they would sit out a year or two, but it turned into 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 20 years, and now they're coming back because it's an unfulfilled item in their life. You really don't want to be in that position if you can avoid it. So my fourth step is get started now. Critical step, I think, if you're moving into that next phase of what you're going to be doing. All right. Well, then we're ready to talk about the fifth step, which is don't repeat the same errors. This is a big one. This is a real big one. I spoke to somebody today who was on one of my webinars, and she heard me say that I was quoting Dave Ramsey, who was talking about the stinky diaper conundrum, which is it's warm and smelly, but it's mine. I think that the same thing is true of the bar exam sometimes. We tend to become very protective of the warm, stinky mess that we make when we're studying. Now, this is not in contradiction to my point number 2 about forgiving yourself. In fact, it's really goes hand in hand with it, because if you forgive yourself, you're giving yourself permission to change what you're doing. Change the approach that you're taking. If you were studying with a big box bar review, maybe you should look at a smaller, more personalized course. If you were studying with us and you failed, maybe you should look at some of the different resources that we offer, things like photo reading or personal mentoring or the paraliminal package or holosync meditation. Any of those items that could enhance or target your studies, those might be more valuable. Getting more conferencing time, more personal assistance, those would all be useful things for you to do. In other words, just don't keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again. This is the great danger. If you're not learning and growing every time you take the exam, even if you're failing the exam, if you are learning and growing, if you are trying new things, you have a decidedly better chance of being successful than if you simply keep repeating the same process over and over again. So when someone comes to me and says, well, I failed the bar exam, as I had an individual contact me last week, and this person told me that they had failed the Cal Bar 3 times. Not with us, they'd been taking another course. And for the rest of the conversation, this individual proceeded to tell me all the things that they knew about the bar exam. They were very earnest, they were very thoughtful, they were all very wrong. I mean, they were just flat out empirically wrong. And no matter how hard I tried to explain to this student that their understanding of scoring and their understanding of how to study, that there were other approaches, and in fact, those were not correct statements empirically, they were convinced that they were correct, and they were convinced that all they had to do was to keep studying the same way. And finally I said, I think if you're just going to keep doing what you've done the last 3 times, you don't need me, but more than that, you're unfortunately, more likely than not, going to fail again. And you'll keep failing until you do something different. I don't care who you study with, but you've got to do something different within even the context of what you're doing. And so if you just keep repeating that same process, the bar exam is very good at taking the same input and returning the same output, the same result. And I think for a lot of people, that's really a major challenge and something that they really get stuck on. And so they just keep churning and churning and churning, doing the same thing over and over again without seeing a different result. So one of the things I think you absolutely have to do if you failed the bar, as you're doing that non-emotional evaluation, step number 3, is start thinking to yourself, what could I do differently? Now, forgiving myself for the mistakes I might have made, what could I do differently this time? Could I look at a different bar review? Or if I want to stay with the same bar review, could I change the level of service? Could I add features or benefits or programs that might assist me, that might get to some things that are problematic for me? Do I need to request accommodations from the bar examiners for some particular reason? Should I look at switching jurisdictions and finding a better jurisdiction for me and for my skills? What should you be doing? But don't keep repeating the same process over and over and over again. So, those are the things that I think are necessary to do. They're not an easy list. You need to grieve. You need to forgive yourself. You need to do that non-emotional evaluation, and you need to get started now. And then finally, you've got to commit to not making the same errors as you work through your studies. If you do those 5 things, in my experience, that's the best way to assure that you'll get a different result on the next bar exam. When you don't do those things, then I think you put yourself at risk of getting the result that you don't want over and over and over again. I know that it's hard to talk about failing the exam. It's hard to think about it before the results come out. It's really tough after results come out if you've been one of the people who failed. But if you'll take to heart what I've said today, I think it can make a huge difference for you, give you the optimism, give you the enthusiasm, give you the instruction that you need to be successful on the next bar exam. So I want to thank all of you for watching today and being with me, and great to have you on this particular video, and look forward to seeing all of you on the pass list in the narrative. Well, that's our episode for today. Thanks so much for joining me and for being part of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. Now, if you'd like to catch up on prior episodes or check out the show notes, you can do that by going to our webpage at celebrationbarreview.com. Click on the link at the top of the page for podcasts, and there you'll find all of our previous episodes as well as the show notes. You can also subscribe to the podcast from that site, or you can go to iTunes and subscribe there. Just type in the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers, and you can subscribe and be part of the podcast series. And we would love to have you do that. While you're on the iTunes site, we would also really appreciate you giving us a quick, honest rating and review. That feedback is really useful to me as I prepare these episodes. It only takes about 30 seconds, so I hope you'll do that. Just type in the name of the podcast and give us your rating and review. Again, if you've got any questions or you'd like to know anything else about Celebration Bar Review or the courses that we offer, visit our website, or I invite you to contact us. My email is jackson@celebrationbarreview.com, and I look forward to hearing from you and to seeing you along the extra mile very shortly. See you on the pass list. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.